Welcome and thanks for joining us for our October webinar for ELA milestones. We have offered one for each grade level in September and October. We're going to do that for the course of the school year so that there will be a number of them for folks to access. These are intended to be brief webinars, but I do hope that they'll be helpful. You can see here that my email address is bbishop@garisa.org. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions about these webinars or about resources that we show. I want to share with you that all of these recordings and the PowerPoints and links to all the resources that we are using can be found at this website here, tinyurl.com/gamilestones.ela. And I'm going to click on that to show you what it looks like. You can see that if you want to access either the PowerPoints or the webinars for September, you can do so. And then now the elementary one is here. I've also included underneath the October 17th webinar recording link, a link directly to the Engage New York item that begins on page 28 and goes through 40. That's the item we're going to be exploring today. So now I shall return us back to the PowerPoint. So the resources that we use to construct this little presentation are actually the information that come from the DOE webinars about constructed response support, along with a constructed response training that we had here at West Georgia RESA and the external prototype sites that we have been given as suggestions from the DOE. So our whole purpose here in this short webinar is to build our capacity to introduce the students to these new expectations, new format, and new content of constructed response questions. And hopefully each of us will be able to think on a personal level about what might be our next steps, what might be our next scripted actions, so to speak, to ensure that we are continuing to prepare students toward supporting the learners in these second generation assessments. The Department of Education has its own Assessment for Learning webinar series devoted to support for the milestones, and they really are very excellent. I encourage you to use them in addition to these and any other resources you can find. I'm just going to click back over to the Milestones website to show you that if you want to get to those DOE eliciting evidence of student learning webinars, you can find them at the link here. Also, their main page with general information about the Georgia Milestones, that page is provided here also, just in case that's helpful. All right, so taking us back to the PowerPoint. The DOE's Eliciting Student Evidence web series has 5 different modules, and they're specific to elementary, middle, or high, but then also they talk about some complex issues in response to items and how to improve conventions through formative assessment. So again, I just suggest that you check those out when you have a chance. From those webinars, they had some really great definitions of assessment for learning, and that's essentially what we're hoping to provide here today, are some ideas and resources for how to take, test, prep materials and sample questions and actually use them in the classroom as learning and teaching materials. And the definition that they've provided for assessment for learning is that's where the teachers are making adjustments in response to assessment evidence, and students are receiving feedback and advice about what to do to improve as they practice with assessments. They have a very excellent reminder that this assessment for learning is part of our expected and effective cycle for instruction, where we diagnose student problems and needs and prescribe what they would need for a lesson, teach that lesson, do our formative assessment, give the feedback to the students and to ourselves about what is needed, redesign and teach, and so on, and back and forth and through the whole cycle again. I think it's pretty evident why we need to teach our students about constructive response questions. But just in our attempt to be thorough, we want to mention here that that's part of our requirements for Race to the Top states, that we will have high quality assessments. And we have now, of course, as you know, consolidated ELA reading and writing into a single measure. And in doing so, made the presentation and assessment of those ELA domains much more integrated. And of course, our constructed response items are much more rigorous than our college and career expectations were, and this will keep us in alignment with all of our external measures. There was a number of data sources to suggest that we needed to do these improvements, and this is just a reminder of that data here. Also, the DOE did a pilot summary of these type of questions with a group of students. And as you can see from this, from looking at this chart real quickly, the students did not fare well. And that is not an indication of a lack of knowledge on their part necessarily, or a lack of skill, or a lack of ability, or even a lack of teaching preparation. It is simply a reflection of the students' unfamiliarity with these kind of questions. So just taking a moment to think, why do students so far at this moment, why are they doing poorly on constructed response questions? And of course, there are many reasons. Sometimes the students just don't answer the question, and they go on to write something that might actually be really well written, and might include some really critical thoughts, but simply don't answer the question. Some students provide an answer that they believe is enough, but we can see that it's shallow and needs more details. Sometimes the students, just in being nervous or not seasoned with these kind of questions, get off topic as they're writing. Sometimes the conventions and the handwriting simply are not supporting being able to be assessed. Sometimes it really does impact a student score. Sometimes the students don't understand the question, and that's going to be really true, or could be more true of this generation assessment than previous, obviously, since these questions are unfamiliar in format. And sometimes the kids, instead of writing about what the passage talked about, they write about what they know about the topic. They're showing their knowledge rather than demonstrating their skill. And sometimes students don't think about their audience, but mostly it's just because the students are not in the habit. They're not in the habit of digging in and excavating for and then building with an answer. They're just in the habit of selecting an answer. And those are completely different cognitive processes that reward different kinds of behavior. So we have a really nice definition here of constructed response questions. And these are questions where the assessment items ask students to apply the knowledge, skills, and critical thinking to real-world standards-driven performance tasks. And this is a scenario where there's more than one way to correctly answer, and require students to construct and develop answers without the benefit of suggestions or choices. And so I know that we knew that, but I think it's useful to see it written out like that. We've been told that there are some unique features to the Georgia Milestones. We have not given up on the world of multiple choice. Multiple choice items remain and will remain on the Georgia Milestones. An easy way to elicit student demonstration of knowledge and skill. And so there will be multiple choice questions. But in addition to that, there will be constructed response in both the ELA and the math, extended response in ELA and math, and also technology enhanced questions beginning in 2016-17. And the DOE's explanation of what that means is written here. Allowing for multiple correct answers and varying methods at arriving for the correct answer. Our students are not used to the notion that they could do good job, that their colleague next to them might do a good job, and yet they might have very different responses. So one thing we could do to prepare students for this kind of assessment is to simply show in the classroom that there are multiple ways to approach and address and respond to these kind of constructed response questions. We've learned a little bit about the parameters of the test and the breakdown. That slide is provided here. We know now that writing is important at every grade level. It's always been important at every grade level, but now we've really demonstrated as a state that we truly believe that by having integrated writing responses at all grades, 3 beyond, and not just those magic grades of 3, 5, 8, and 11. We know that these writing assignments are going to have different kinds of rubrics than what we're used to. We haven't been given specific rubrics necessarily to study, but as this image shows, we know that the rubrics are likely to be more holistic than we are used to in the past, because we're used to the writing assessment that had specific domains, and our examples that we are receiving as suggested items to use for our own familiarity, those items have this holistic kind of rubric where the entire response is graded as either incorrect or irrelevant, or demonstrated just minimally or basically or thoroughly, etc. So this isn't the exact rubric that we will always have for for our writing, but this is an example. And I think you can tell from the descriptors that in this one, it actually mentions healthy cookies, and that's because this rubric is specific to the question. And that's going to be the case with the rubrics that we will have for our constructed response. We'll see examples here in a moment. A colleague of mine, Ms. Dawn Bennett here at West Georgia RESA, who's our GLRS support specialist, she came up with a nice acronym that has really been helping teachers and students for an approach to address constructed response questions. And her suggestion is that the students think of a RACE, and think of the acronym RACE, and R for rewording or restating the question, A for providing an answer, C for citing using evidence, and E for explaining that evidence and how it supports your answer. And so to get kids to practice with that, there are a few graphic organizers you can use. This one is a simple like box area where you can just put in the prompt itself, have the kids practice restating, giving a simple answer, then looking for the details and the evidence that they might cite, and then providing their explanation. We also have this one. Athletes work hard in a race. Let's work hard in this race. The restatement, my first try at answering, my citation, and my explanation. And I think it's important that the little plus signs are there, because we want the kids to know that all those things are part of the answer. That a very thorough answer would restate the question in some way and would have an initial, answer that's direct, but then would include a citation from the text and would include an explanation of why that citation is supporting the answer. And of course, this is something we want to build students up to, and these skills might not necessarily be there as we're practicing early in the year. Now, I think it's really important that we stick to the language of the standards, and kids need to know citation, but as they're learning it, I think it's okay if you want to use C for copy, like restating the question, answering the question, copying some information from the text, and then explaining my answer. So if that helps kids get there a little bit, then I think that's okay until they have that academic vocabulary for citation. This is a simple little question, but I think it's a good reminder to us that some kids just simply need practice restating the question. Why were the 3 bears so upset when they came home? The 3 bears were so upset when they came home because. And of course, that's very simple to us and very simple to students who who are fluent in answering these kind of questions, but some kids need that actual practice. Also, we want kids to know that there are certain words that if they can use these words, they will often lead them to additional information, like the word because, to, by, when, if, until. So you might want to make a little poster or have the kids work together to come up with some words that if they can figure out how to get that word into their answer, then they probably are adding more of the right kind of information. Also, we want kids to actually practice marking up a prompt. So, what do you do in the evening when you get home from school becomes in the evening when I get home from school, and then you can have the kids mark out the restated words. And of course, that's just the first step to getting the restatement. You can also assign roles in the classroom where one student might be the oral restatement helper, another one might mark on the sentence strip, and another one might rewrite the statement on chart paper. I think the notion of constructed response, I think it might help with this analogy, constructed and construction, like a construction worker. A construction worker needs materials, and so does someone answering a constructed response question. So I like to ask the kids, can you build without materials? I say, no. So what are your materials when you are answering a constructed response? It's all the little pieces of the text that you see in front of you, and that those words and phrases and ideas that are in the text, those are the little pieces of materials that you pick out and pick up and construct with, so to speak, in your response. So we were told from the DOE that there are a number of places on the internet where we can find some really good examples of the kinds of questions that are like our second generation questions. And if I'm going to click back for a moment to the website to show you that those particular links, like the DOE's Formative Item Bank, which will soon be called GOFAR, the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, PARC, NAEP, etc., and a few of these other states, those are the suggested places for us to get questions that are very similar to the kinds that the kids will encounter. So this particular question comes from the Engage New York site, and I have a direct link to that PDF file back here under the October 17th PowerPoint webinar. Here it is right there. And I also wanted to mention, this slide probably belonged somewhere else, but that there are a couple sentence starters that if kids can get used to sentence starters like this, that often it leads them in the right direction. An example is, I know this because the author wrote in the text, according to the text, according to this shows, now I know, this proves. So I would actually make a poster of these kind of sentence starters and encourage kids to incorporate one or more of these into their responses. So we're hoping that when the kids put it all together, that if they have their sentence starters and some of those expected transition words, along with their evidence and their race answers from the restatement, their initial answer, their citation, and their explanation, that they can get to a good response. So here's an example of one of those questions. This one, as I said, comes from the New York site. And the question is, why is the setting of the Cave of the Oil Bird important? Use 2 details from the story to support your response. Well, here is the actual story that the kids read, The Cave of the Oil Bird. And it's just 2 little pages here. And of course, to get a better copy to use to like photocopy in class or whatever, you would want to use that link rather than this PowerPoint. But basically, in The Cave of the Oil Bird, this brother takes this sister like into a cave and wants to show her about oil birds that are in there, and it's just a direct story, and it's of the typical sort of fourth grade lexile, I think. But the question, of course, is a higher order question, because it's not just a what happened, but it's a why does it matter that it was in a cave, and using two details to support your response. So one suggestion that I think works well for helping kids get to this kind of to get to these kind of responses is to withhold the actual question for a while. Like, I wouldn't show them, this is just a suggestion, but the way I like to do it is I wouldn't show them this screen or this question, why is the setting of the cave of the oil bird important, and use two details from the story to support your response. I would just have them read, and then I would ask a question such as, like, how would this be different if it wasn't in a cave? What did you think about when you found out it was in a cave? Let's circle some of the words that relate to, the setting, the cave, etc., and then have them talk about and write about that, and then come back and show them, look what you actually did. You actually answered this fancy question. Why is the setting of the cave of the oil bird important? Use two details from the story to support your response. So I like that, just as a little sort of reveal of the question at the end. But here's some ideas for how to use this resource that we got from New York. First of all, you can work the whole thing full group. You can talk at full group. You can simply have as your goal to have the kids gain exposure to questions of this kind. Or you could talk about it in full group and then have them work in small group, which is to collaborate, before they do it independently. You could administer it simply as a benchmark. And I know we don't have time to, have dozens and dozens of benchmarks, but if you were to give this as an in-class writing, and then simply make two piles as you're going through them, the pile of this kid can do it and this kid, I'm not sure if they can do it. And then you would at least have some data about the kids who might need some more direct instruction with this kind of a question. This particular resource includes student responses. So one thing you could do is have the kids read the responses and talk about or put them in order of success. If you want to differentiate, you could give some kids just two of them, although I think there's also, there's four responses here, but you could give like some kids just, an upper and lower, and have them talk about the qualities of an excellent response, put them in order of success. You could hand them one, any of them actually, and have them add or edit to it to improve. Or you can have them, sorry, that got cut off a little bit, but you could have them write the test taker a little note and tell them what they did well or what they should do next time. And so here is one of the student samples, and in it, the student actually is able to explain why it matters that the setting was a cave, and to use two details to support the response. And so that's why that student gets a 2 out of 2. And here's another student that also, with a different language and a different example, also managed to get a 2 out of 2. And this student gets a 1 out of 2. And so it's really useful to have to use this as a teachable moment and to show the kids the difference between what was accomplished in this student response and what was accomplished in the other two. And this one also is a 1. Sorry, that got cut off. But when you go to the real resource, then it does have all of the scores at the bottom. And then this is a score that got 0 out of 2. And I think it's important for kids to see that even though the student got a 0, the student still said something that is true. And so I think it's important that the kids know that if you write something true, that doesn't mean you're going to get credit for it. I know that seems like a cruel world, but I think it's important that they know that. I mean, it is true that if you don't know the setting, it will be boring, but that's not answering the question, of course. There's also, with this particular resource, a second question that goes with that same passage, and Again, it has 4 work samples, 2 that are at 2s, 1 that's at 1, and another that is at 0. And so I want to go back to this slide right here since it's probably the most important for us. About what we can actually do with these student work samples. We can work with different students in different ways with these work samples. With this student response samples. And in doing so, then we can support our own efforts to differentiate for the learners. But these are, in essence, some of the ideas for how we can use the resources that we've been provided as examples as teaching materials in the classroom. We're going to have an elementary and middle and high school webinar like this one every month. And I hope that you will return either to listen to those recordings and those webinars, or to simply go to this page and access the monthly PowerPoint and the suggested resource to see if you want to use any of that text or those questions in your classroom work. If you have any questions about this webinar series or the resources that we have here, then please let me know. And now I want to go to the very last page to share with you that there is a website where you can evaluate this session if you would like at tinyurl.com/bbishoppl survey. This is early in the year, and this is only our second one for ELA Elementary, and I'd love to hear if you have ideas for how to improve upon it. So have a wonderful weekend. I think it's terrific that you've spent some of your Friday afternoon thinking about how to get kids more ready for these kind of assessments, and please let us know if there's anything we can do to help you. Christy, do you have any questions?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.